I used to believe that heartbreak announced itself with some kind of dramatic rupture, the kind you see in movies: glass shattering, sobbing in the rain, a grand emotional collapse that everyone could witness. But when my boyfriend left me, there was no sound, no visible destruction, nothing theatrical to frame the moment. What happened instead was a silence so heavy, so absolute, it felt like someone had pressed pause on the entire world, except the part of me that was falling apart. The strange thing about that silence is how it lingers. It doesn't echo. It doesn't fade. In those first few minutes, I remember staring at the door long after it had closed, expecting it to swing back open, expecting him to say he didn't mean it. But the only thing that answered me was the undeniable stillness of a room that suddenly felt too big for just me. They think it's yelling, crying, slamming doors, breaking dishes. It's the emptiness that hits you first, subtle, creeping, almost polite in the way it steals your breath before you realize what's happening. It's lying in bed and reaching for someone who's no longer there. It's the quiet truth that the person you trusted with the most fragile parts of you chose to walk away. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, internal unraveling I didn't know how to stop. Had he ever loved me as much as I loved him? I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I always assumed heartbreak would come with tears. I remember pacing around the room, picking up objects that reminded me of us, putting them down, picking them up again, like I was performing some ritual I didn't understand. My body was moving, but my mind was frozen somewhere between disbelief and denial. The silence in the room felt almost aware of me, like it was watching me process the moment with a kind of detached cruelty. For a second, I imagined the walls whispering, "He's really gone." Because silence, unlike words, doesn't give you anything to argue with. It leaves you alone with your interpretations, your insecurities, your fears. I kept replaying the argument, searching for the exact sentence, the exact breath, the exact look that turned the moment into an ending. It's unbelievable how the mind works when you read broken. It zooms in on every detail, like it's trying to rewrite the story just enough to make the ending different. But no amount of analysis changes the fact that he chose to leave. And that choice echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. At one point, I found myself touching the spot on the table where he placed his key before walking out. It felt like a symbol, like he was returning more than a piece of metal. He was returning responsibility, intimacy, connection. That one action said everything he didn't have the courage to say out loud. I walked around the apartment like a ghost in my own space, trying to piece together where things had gone wrong. It's absurd how heartbreak makes you blame yourself even when the truth is more complicated. But love should never be about shrinking yourself. Still, in that moment, logic wasn't my friend. It was grief speaking, and grief is irrational. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to figure out who I was now that he had decided I wasn't the person he wanted. It's terrifying how much of your identity can get tied to someone else when you don't notice it happening. I saw a face that looked like mine, but somehow felt unfamiliar: empty eyes, tight jaw, a stillness I didn't know how to shake off. The room felt colder without him in it, as if his presence had been its source of warmth. I wrapped my arms around myself, not for comfort, but because I suddenly felt like my body might fall apart if I didn't hold it together physically. Heartbreak makes you do things you don't understand in the moment. Everything becomes about surviving the next second. I replayed his last words so many times that I began to forget the tone he said them in. My mind kept altering his voice, making it softer or harsher depending on the wave of emotion I was drowning in. That's the cruel part about being left behind. You're stuck with echoes that distort themselves, memories that rewrite without your permission, emotions that don't ask if you're ready. By midnight, I realized I hadn't eaten, hadn't moved much, hadn't even processed half of what had happened. But my heart understood one thing clearly: he wasn't coming back. I remember gripping the edge of the bed and breathing slowly, like I needed to manually remind my body how to exist. Every small sound in the apartment, the humming of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, felt amplified. I kept expecting him to walk in, apologizing the way he always did, telling me he needed a moment to think. I didn't know how to mourn someone who was still alive, someone who had simply chosen not to be part of my world anymore. It felt like grieving a ghost who had decided to haunt someone else. It was emotional clutter, and I didn't know where to put any of it. Eventually, I lay down, not to sleep, but to find some kind of stillness within myself. But heartbreak doesn't let you rest. It follows you into the softness of your pillow, into the darkness behind your eyelids, into the spaces where your thoughts drift without your consent. I closed my eyes, hoping for numbness, but instead, the pain sharpened. It doesn't let you soothe yourself easily. It's a storm that builds inside you until it becomes the only weather you know. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just hurt. I was heartbroken in a way that changed the rhythm of who I was. At some point, I sat up again, unable to stay still. The world outside was indifferent. Cars passed. People laughed in the distance. Life continued as if my universe hadn't just imploded. That contrast made the loneliness sharper. It was a reminder that pain doesn't pause the world. It only pauses you. I caught myself whispering his name, as if saying it out loud would bring him back. But all it did was break something else inside me. Hearing his name in the silence made me realize how deeply I had let him into my world. Too deeply. Deep enough that removing him felt like amputating a part of myself. That's the danger of loving someone without boundaries. You don't realize how much space they occupy until they're gone. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest like a child hiding from a storm. And maybe that's exactly what I felt, like a child who had trusted someone completely, only to be left out in the cold. Vulnerability feels different when trust is broken. It becomes a wound instead of a doorway. And that wound was raw. The worst part wasn't that he left. It was that he left so easily. No hesitation. No looking back. No sign that the memories we shared held weight in his decision. That simplicity made my pain feel foolish, as if I had been the only one who believed we were building something real. It made me question everything: our conversations, his promises, the moments that felt meaningful. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but every app, every photo, every message thread felt like a landmine. I kept stumbling upon reminders of a life that existed only hours before, but now felt impossibly distant. That's the cruel irony of modern heartbreak. Technology turns healing into an obstacle course of memories you didn't ask to relive. At one point, I opened a message thread with him, reading past conversations where he said things like, "I'll never leave," and "you're my future." Those words cut deeper now, because they were lies, but because they once felt so real. I deleted the thread, but even as I did it, I felt the sting of finality. Deleting messages doesn't delete feelings. It just erases the evidence. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, exhaustion began to blur the edges of my pain. My mind felt bruised, my heart felt heavy, and my body felt like it was carrying grief in every muscle. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment we'd shared, every argument that led us here, every hope I had for our future. They become reminders of what you lost, not of what you had. And that loss felt like a slow, excruciating ache. It was more like slipping into temporary unconsciousness, interrupted by dreams that looked too much like reality. Heartbreak changes you in ways you don't see immediately. It shifts your internal landscape, rearranges your priorities, and forces you to confront truths you would have rather ignored. The morning light made everything real. The empty space beside me, the quiet apartment, and for a long moment, I just lay there, letting the weight of it sink in. It was the faintest hint of resilience, the beginning of a belief that maybe, just maybe, I would learn to live without him. It would take time, tears, reflection, and strength I didn't know I had. For me, it was that morning, the moment I realized that even though I was brokenhearted, I was still here.